We're back. This is Sam Collins and Norman Pappous with Meet in the Middle. Our special guest today is Mr. Reginald Moore. We have been talking about the convict leasing system in the state of Texas and really the United States as a whole. The last segment was on records and documents. One of the things that we did want to talk about also is how the past affects the present. And Mr. Moore had mentioned briefly that the working of the inmates still today is going on. It's not the same because the state outlawed the leasing of the contracts to private companies. I believe we talked about 1910. We'll have to look that exact year and law up, but around the beginning of the 20th century. But still today, the mass incarceration and use of the prison system to incarcerate large populations of individuals. When we think about the United States as 5% of the world population, but 25% of the prison population. The other thing that's important to me to make a note of when we look at the historical context and the cultural conditioning of our society, to criminalize and paint a picture of criminal behavior by black and brown individuals at a much larger rate, we have to look at how did we come to this point in 2018 to have in our mind when we say the word criminal or we think convict, what probably comes to our mind is this image of poor black and brown kids being criminals, when we know that there are so many different forms of criminal behavior at all different levels of our society. But when you go back to 1866 and the beginning of this process to start a narrative around who is a criminal and what was done legally was not necessarily right. So we just because it was legal didn't make it right. Slavery was legal, but it wasn't right. Convict leasing was legal, but it wasn't right. So when we have incidents today between policemen and the system, for some individuals, particularly myself, when I study this history, I think about slave patrols, the convict leasing system, and today's police system, in which you have a group of individuals that are constantly on the hunt for another group of individuals. And that may be, some may feel, well, that's not fair if they wouldn't break the law. But how the law's written, Mr. Moore talked about the crack epidemic and how the unequal punishment between crack and cocaine, the prison sentences were so different. This is part of that conversation. So when you think about how this narrative was shaped, you think about movies like, what was the movie 1915? I just went blank.
I'm not sure, but The Color Purple comes to mind for me.
No, I'm talking about before the first movie that was shown in the White House.
Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation.
Right.
So when you think about the narrative, that was 50 years after 1865 and 1915. When you think about the narrative that was pushed to make a certain segment of our society seem more aggressive and more violent, when that percentage of the population of the United States is only 13% of the population, but then you look into the prison system and there's much more, a higher percentage, and you say, well, they don't have access to good counsel, or they just should stop breaking the law. I went to college at Texas A&M University. There are some things that students did at Texas A&M University that I would never try. Kids that got out of trouble for things that I would never imagine doing. So the behavior of young people is pretty much the same through all demographics. You make bad decisions when you're young. Some things we get caught for, some things we don't. But the punishment that is dished out is often harsher for poor and individuals that don't have access to counsel.
And in this case, the topic that we're really focusing on is young black males from 14 to however old were getting imprisoned in anticipation of a labor demand by private industry who needed them to work the fields.
And the state, yeah.
Yeah. And that's that to me is I had no idea, and maybe it's something that I knew, but I didn't really understand the full implication of. But to me, the other part of this that separates this is the line you can draw from the profits that are generated in those fields to money in bank accounts today.
Oh, there's still
The line is not unclear.
there's still a great deal of wealth that was transferred through the use of that labor to certain companies, businesses, families, and individuals.
Yeah.
And that is just a fact of the.
Mr.
what
Moore,
happened.
I mean, when you read some of these names, did your eyes kind of pop out?
Yeah, they have a lot of people who are big benefactors now, and we're going to try to go back to them and some of the benefactors and give them an opportunity to support us in this memorial in the museum. But since these convicts brought the state of Texas out of restitution when it had been pretty much devastated from the war. And so you have a lot of these companies now are still in existence, a lot of the railroad companies who have profited from this. A lot of your major industries now that are in existence today, and some of them have taken on different names, profited profited big time, So you got to look at a lot of those individuals that they capitalize off of this, and because of this, just like they had in Georgetown University when recently one of the things there with Georgetown University, they had a lot of slaves, and how the university got up on its feet was from the selling of the slaves and the use of slavery, and they had to come back. And what they did is they gave free tuition today for some of the atrocities of the past. So yeah, the state of Texas benefited big time for this, and this is why the state is in the condition that it's in, because of the exploitation of this atrocity up under this convict lease system that brought the state out of recession. And the sad thing about it was done through a period of time they called Reconstruction. So actually, the African Americans, the blacks, had a lot of authority in Reconstruction to vote themselves in before the law changed in 1883 when they took their voting rights back somewhere up in that period of time. But they actually reconstructed the state of Texas and brought it out of recession by themselves working and voting themselves into power and authority to help laws and to reconstruct when they had the voting rights, and they were the leaders of some of this. And then at the same time, when the state exploited the labor through the convict leasing system, so it was this. They were big. The state is big benefactors, and the state has a duty to pay back some type of restitution, because you got slavery by another name started out in 1891. We were the orchestrators of the convict lease system. We started here in 1867. Douglas Black and them stories started in 1891, and they excluded Texas. We were the template that was used for the other states, and so I think that the federal government, the state, and the local entities, have due authority, and the companies, the railroads, and all of this is in that Kempner book, the
Sugarland
Sugar, and it shows all the benefactors and all the industries that benefit of that are basically in existence now.
So even though the fields that were worked were we're talking about Brazoria, the Sugarland,
Fort Bend County, Brazoria County, all over the state.
And Warden County.
But those were the fields that were worked. But the people that owned those fields were much more close to home. They were here in Galveston.
Exactly. You have, again, Rosenberg, one of them. Samuel May Williams, and basically every league that they call them, they gave league to these Austin 300s, and there was 300, each one of them had a league.
And of course, Samuel May Williams was before slavery ended. He was one of the original groups,
right,
Austin groups.
And he was during that period of time. They was harvesting sugar cane, and they wanted to continue doing this, and that's when they had to get that labor back some kind of way because it was highly labor-induced work.
Sure.
And they would work these guys after slavery, working till the muscles fell off their bones, as some of the anthropology reports that we're getting today shows that how badly they were
How many
working.
bodies have they found?
95, one female in there, and there was 95 bodies, and ranged from age 14
to 70.
14 to 70 years old. And so, this here was, I say, crimes against humanity. It was an atrocity, and it was inhumane. It was like what we do now when you have an animal, so you mistreat an animal here. You had a humane society. What was the humanity in this? And it was orchestrated and delegated and condoned by the whole state of Texas, and like I say, it was even legislated.
Are there companies existing now that exist because of the profit margins they were able to make through forced convict labor back in the 19th and early 20th centuries?
Again, one of them is Sugarland, which was the Kempner Zone, which turned, I believe, Sugarland Industries, okay, and Imperial Sugar. And the Kempner family today, I believe the company has been sold, but they believe they were stockholders, and they bought the old Cunningham and Ellis contract out, the land they had, which they was running the sugar mill in 1908. And the convict leasing system that stopped technically to 10, but it ran into basically around 1914.
Do you know for a fact that the convict leasing was going on with Imperial in 1910?
Yes, it is. Yes, it was.
Okay.
It's just dated in several different categories. When they bought it in 1908, they actually bought the Ellis portion out right there, and the Cunningham, and that's why the old Imperial Cemetery where I'm at, where I'm the guardian on, is called Imperial Cemetery, because they bought it in 1908, and then the system ran into 1910, and it's written in the history books, the books there, that the Kempner family, after it had been abolished, the convict lease system was abolished, when they used it for a few years, okay, then they sold it to the state, the land back, they tried to come back and get it re-legislated in. For that convict lease system to come back, and that was something that was written in the books also, that it was so profitable.
I want
then.
people to understand this point you just made. Can you repeat that, please?
Well, and when it was abolished in 1910, the Kempner family had already was using the convict lease system. They had a farm. It was called the Old Imperial Cemetery Farm. They had bought the Cunningham, the Ellis farm, and they named it Imperial Farm, which was a Cunningham farm previously. So that's where the central prison is at right now. It just got closed. It was called the Cunningham first, and it was called Imperial Farm. Then it went from Imperial Farm to Central Unit when Imperial Sugar sold that back to them around 1912.
Is it your opinion that convict labor was going on post 1910 on that property?
No doubt, no doubt. It ran to where I'm reading. It ran into. They gave them a grace period. The law was that, but they didn't. They gave them a period of transition out, and so it was still going on for about 3 or 4 years prior.
And they
to
probably had
1908.
existing contracts prior to the law change.
Right, and they
So
just
they
let
probably
them.
stuck with those contracts.
Exactly.
that
Until
they
those
had.
then those laws, no contracts ended out, then it was abolished. You just couldn't
Renew the contract.
forming a new contracts.
So you've given a lot of people a lot to really think about, and I'd like to invite you back to the program. After some more, pardon the pun, is uncovered. Right now, we got to get going due to technical constraints on our equipment. But would you come back and talk with us some more?
Sure, another time. You're more than happy, to come back and to share this, and hopefully it can be some accountability, and hopefully we can get some apologies and maybe some type of restitution, reconciliation, and maybe a form of reparation for these guys' sweat equity that they put into making this state and the United States what it is today. So I believe there should be some type of
Absolutely.
value that's
Absolutely.
put into
Maybe
that.
we can get an attorney in here to talk about, how that might
Right.
look.
And
Well, the other thing with the state, which
where do
you're
we
talking
go
about-
from here?
Yeah, where do we go from here? We're going to have an event on Labor Day, so hopefully we're going to get this up before Labor Day. That's going to be September 3rd in Sugar Land. It's a private event where we're going to bring out stakeholders to talk about where do we go from here. We want
heal.
to help
Yeah.
heal the country and move us forward. When I think about Texas A&M, formed in 1876, Prairie View formed in 1876. Let's look at these two institutions. Where are we today? State of Texas, I believe, has a responsibility to help bring Prairie View up to a level through resources that they gain through a system like this that could be beneficial for the students and staff at that campus. So we want to thank you for tuning in. This is Sam Collins and Norman Pappous with Meet in the Middle with our special guest, Mr. Reginald Moore. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure
Thank you, Mr. Moore.
The honor's
to
mine.
visit with you.
Okay.
And we look forward to talking with you again.